The sun was sinking behind the red cliffs of Arizona, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Wind carried the dry scent of sagebrush and dust, whispering across the land that once belonged to warriors and wild horses. Along a lonely trail, a woman stumbled forward, clutching a small bundle wrapped in a torn blanket against her chest. Her boots were worn thin, her dress ripped and stained from days of struggle. Every step was a battle between fear and exhaustion, yet she kept going, her eyes wide and alert, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Behind her, the empty land stretched for miles, but the silence was never comforting, carried the feeling of eyes watching from somewhere unseen. She had been left behind. That much was clear in her trembling hands and the desperate way she clung to the baby. The wagon train had moved on without her after her husband was shot in an ambush days ago. They couldn't risk waiting for her, not with raiders nearby. She'd begged them to stay, to give her a horse, anything but fear-ruled hearts on the frontier. And so they rode off, leaving her with her child, alone in the heart of Apache country. The baby's cry cut through the still air, soft at first, then rising into the kind of sound that pierced the heart. She rocked him, whispering softly, trying to calm him, but her own voice cracked with tears. Her lips were dry, her skin burned beneath the desert sun, and her canteen had been empty since morning. She could barely stand, yet she pressed forward because stopping meant dying. Far in the distance, the faint sound of hoofbeats echoed across the valley. She froze, heart pounding. The instinct to hide was stronger than reason. Dropping to her knees, she crawled toward a cluster of boulders, clutching her baby close. Dust clung to her face, and her breath came in ragged gasps. The hoofbeats grew louder. She didn't know if it was soldiers, bandits, or worse, Apache warriors. Stories of them haunted every campfire tale across the plains. Some called them savages, ghosts of the desert, who struck like lightning. Others whispered that they were the rightful keepers of the land, fierce and proud. But now, to her trembling mind, they were simply death approaching on horseback. A rider appeared on the ridge-alone figure against the dying sun. The man sat tall on his horse, bare-chested beneath a leather vest, his skin the color of sun-warmed earth, his long black hair tied with a strip of cloth. The glint of metal from a rifle slung across his back caught the light. His eyes scanned the horizon like a hawk's. He was Apache. The woman's heart seized with terror. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows of the rocks, holding her baby so tight that he whimpered. Her mind screamed for silence, for the earth itself to swallow them. But the warrior turned his horse and began riding toward her hiding place. She whispered prayers, tears streaking her dirt-covered cheeks. The baby cried louder now, hungry and frightened. She tried to quiet him, but it was too late. The warrior had heard. He stopped his horse a few feet away and dismounted with slow, deliberate movements. He didn't raise his weapon or shout. He simply stood still, watching the woman trembling before him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Only the wind spoke. Then he took a single step closer. His voice, when it came, was low and calm, carrying an accent heavy with his people's tongue. "You alone?" She didn't answer. Her body shook so hard she could barely breathe. He looked around the empty land, scanning for tracks, signs of others. Finding none, he crouched down to meet her eyes. His gaze wasn't cruel, it held something unexpected. Something almost like pity. The baby let out another cry, and the warrior's expression softened. He set his rifle aside and reached into a small pouch hanging from his belt. From it, he pulled a water skin and held it out toward her. She hesitated, eyes darting from the weapon to his face, unsure whether it was a trap. But thirst and desperation overcame her fear. She reached out with shaking hands and drank. The cool water ran down her throat, reviving her strength just enough to look back at him. "Why you alone?" he asked again, this time more quietly. Her voice broke as she tried to speak. "They left us. They said we'd slow them down." His jaw tightened. He understood cruelty. He'd seen it in many forms. He glanced toward the horizon where the wagon tracks had already faded into dust. "White men," he murmured, not with anger, but with weary understanding. Then he did something she didn't expect. He lifted the edge of the blanket that covered her child. His dark eyes softened further as he looked at the tiny face beneath. Without a word, he reached down and brushed the baby's cheek with the back of his fingers. It was a gesture of quiet wonder, not violence. The woman didn't know what to do. Her body screamed for her to run, but something in the man's calm presence stopped her. He wasn't like the stories told by frightened settlers. There was strength in him, yes, but not cruelty. Still, she didn't trust Isley, not anymore. The warrior stood, looked around once more, and then reached down, as if to help her stand. "You cannot stay here," he said. "Night comes soon. Coyotes. Cold. You die." His words were simple, his tone flat, but the meaning was clear. He turned toward his horse, motioning for her to follow. She hesitated, clutching her baby close. The choice was brutal: follow the Apache warrior into the unknown or stay and face the desert's mercy. As the last light of the sun faded behind the cliffs, the air turned sharp with the chill of night. The woman looked at the man's broad back, the steady way he moved, and the gentle way he handled his horse. Something deep inside her whispered that fate had brought him for a reason. She took one uncertain step forward, then another. As the warrior turned slightly, enough for their eyes to meet again. "You trust me?" he asked. "Shh." She didn't answer, but she nodded once, just enough to be seen. He gave a single, silent nod in return. Then he reached out and lifted her into the saddle behind him, as if she weighed nothing. Her arms instinctively wrapped around him as the baby rested between them. The warmth of his body contrasted against the growing cold of the desert. As they rode through the darkening valley, the only sounds were the steady beat of the horse's hooves and the faint cry of the child. Stars began to appear overhead, shimmering above the canyon walls. For the first time in days, the woman allowed herself to breathe without fear. But deep inside, she knew this journey was only beginning. The Apache warrior rode with purpose, his eyes fixed ahead. He seemed to know where he was going, though he said nothing. Each mile carried them deeper into a land where few outsiders had ever gone and returned. She didn't understand his world, his people, or what he intended to do with her, but she could feel that he carried his own scars, his own ghosts. The moon rose, lighting their path in silver. Shadows moved in the distance, wolves maybe, or men. The warrior slowed his horse, his muscles tensing. He looked toward the horizon, scanning the ridges, then turned slightly toward her. "Hold the child tight," he said quietly. Fear gripped her once more. The sound of faint drums echoed far away, rising and falling with the wind. It wasn't the sound of nature. It was human, measured, rhythmic, and coming closer. The warrior's face hardened. His hand went to his rifle. "It's not my people," he muttered. The woman's heart thudded in her chest. She looked at him, then at the dark horizon, then down at her child, who whimpered softly in her arms. "Who are they?" she whispered. The Apache warrior didn't answer. He only looked ahead, his eyes burning with quiet resolve. "Hold on," he said. And as the first echo of war cries broke the silence of the night, he spurred his horse forward into the darkness, carrying the woman and her crying child in his arms, toward a fate neither of them could yet see. The pounding of hooves echoed through the canyon as the Apache warrior urged his horse forward, the woman clinging to him, her child pressed tightly against her chest. All the night swallowed them whole, the cold air biting at their faces. Behind them, faint cries rose and fell, like ghosts carried on the wind. She didn't dare look back. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the cry of an owl, felt like danger. The warrior's muscles were tense beneath her hands, his every move sharp and certain. He rode like a man who knew the land by instinct, like the desert itself had marked his path. The woman's heart hammered in rhythm with the horse's gallop. She couldn't tell how long they rode, only that the stars wheeled overhead, and the baby's sobs faded into exhausted whimpers. Finally, when her strength began to fail, the warrior pulled the reins and slowed the horse near a cluster of dark rocks. The baby stirred, letting out a faint cry that seemed to echo too loud in the stillness. The warrior's hand rose sharply. Silence. He crouched low, ear close to the ground, listening. The desert had its own language, and he understood it better than any man alive. After a moment, he looked up at her and spoke quietly. "Stop. Not follow now. Wait for sunrise." His voice was calm, but there was tension in his eyes. She looked at him, shivering, her mind spinning with questions. "Who are they?" she whispered. He met her gaze. "It's not Apache. Outlaws. Take what they want. Kill what they cannot take." His words came slowly, but their meaning hit her like a blow. Her knees went weak. She had thought the worst was over when he appeared. but the world beyond the horizon still hunted them. He motioned toward the rocks, leading her to a small hollow, hidden by brush and stone. There he kindled a small fire, just enough for warmth, not enough for light to travel far. She sat near the fire, cradling her baby. The warmth brought tears to her eyes. It had been days since she'd felt it. The warrior handed her a small strip of dried meat, then sat across from her in silence. His face was half lit by the flames, carved with the hard lines of a man who had seen too much. For a long while neither spoke. Only the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of the child filled the night. Then she found her voice. "You saved us," she said quietly. "You didn't have to." He looked at her, the fire reflecting in his eyes. "No one should die alone in the desert," he said. There was no pride in his tone, no need for gratitude, just a simple truth. She studied him through the flickering light. A necklace of carved bone hung around his neck. His hair was long and straight, falling across his shoulders. Everything about him spoke of a life tied to the land free, yet burdened by something heavy. "Do you have a name?" she asked after a pause. He hesitated, as if the question didn't have an easy answer. "My people call me Koa," he said finally. "Means strong." She repeated the name softly, almost to herself. "Koa." He nodded once. "And you?" Her lips trembled. "Evelyn," she said. "Evelyn Ward." Koa gave a slight nod, his eyes flickering toward the sleeping baby. "Boy, yes," she said. "His name's Samuel." The Apache warrior's gaze softened for a heartbeat before he turned back to the fire. He reached into his pouch again, this time pulling out a small, carved charm, and placed it near the flames. "For protection," he said. Evelyn didn't know what to say. She'd been raised to fear his kind, to believe that Apache men were ruthless and wild. But here he was, offering warmth, food, and safety when her own people had abandoned her. When the wind shifted, bringing the smell of smoke from far off, Koa's head lifted sharply. His expression changed. He stood, eyes fixed toward the north. "What is it?" Evelyn asked, clutching Samuel closer. "Campfire," he said. "It's too close." Her blood ran cold. "Them?" He nodded once. "Maybe." Without another word, he stamped out the fire, scattering the embers with his boot. "No?" The night fell dark again, only the stars burning overhead. They climbed higher, the path rough and steep, until they reached a ledge overlooking the valley below. From there, faint lights flickered in the distance fires. Several of them. Evelyn's breath caught. "How many?" Koa's jaw tightened. "Too many?" She could barely make out their forms, but the glow of fire and the faint sound of laughter carried through the night. He watched them for a long moment, unmoving, then finally turned away. "We moved before dawn," he said. "Far from here." She nodded weakly, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. They rested in turns through the night. When the first pale light of morning touched the cliffs, he woke her with a gentle nudge. The desert stretched ahead, silent and endless. As they began to move, Evelyn found herself watching him more closely. He didn't speak much, but every movement told a story. When he stopped to check the ground, his eyes scanned for signs invisible to her. When the wind changed, he seemed to feel it before it touched her face. He was part of the land in a way she could never be. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, the air growing hot again. The desert shimmered like glass. Evelyn's lips cracked, her arms ached from holding Samuel, and every step felt heavier than the last. But Koa never slowed. When she stumbled, he turned back, took the baby for a while, and carried him easily in one arm, as if he weighed nothing. At midday, they found shelter beneath a rocky overhang, where a trickle of water ran down from the stone. It was barely enough to wet their lips, but it was life. Evelyn knelt and drank, her hands shaking. She looked at him, the question she'd been holding finally breaking free. "Why are they after us?" he said, "outlaws. But how did they know we were here?" "They follow me." Her breath caught. "You?" He nodded slowly. "I take something from them, something they steal from my people." His eyes hardened. "Kill for gold, for land, for power. They burn villages. They take our horses, our children. I take back what is ours." Evelyn stared at him, the pieces starting to fall together. "So when you found me, I thought maybe it was trap." but I find you." His tone didn't change. But she could hear the unspoken truth. He hadn't expected to find a mother alone in the wilderness. "Then why didn't you leave me?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his face unreadable. "'Cause I know what it means to lose everything." The words hung between them, heavy with memory. Yes. She wanted to ask what he had lost, but something in his eyes told her not to. Later, as the day faded again into evening, they continued their journey. The land began to change, more brush, more hills. They passed ancient carvings etched into stone, shapes and symbols she didn't understand. Koa paused at one of them, touching the weathered rock with reverence. "My ancestors," he said quietly. "They walked this path before the world forgot their names." There was pride in his voice, but also sorrow. Evelyn watched him, realizing that he carried not just the weight of survival, but the history of a people nearly erased. As darkness began to fall again, the wind shifted. This time it brought a new sound, the distant howl of wolves. But beneath it, Koa heard something else. "They found us," he said. Her heart lurched. "What do we do?" Koa grabbed his rifle, eyes sharp. "We move into the hills. Quiet." He lifted Samuel into her arms and led her into a narrow ravine. The rocks rose around them like walls, the shadows deep. Behind them, the faint clatter of hooves grew louder. Evelyn's breath came fast. "Can we outrun them?" "No," Koa said, "but they don't know the land." He crouched low, pointing toward a narrow passage hidden by brush. "Go through there." "What about you?" He looked at her, steady and calm. "I lead them away." She shook her head. "No, you can't. They'll kill you." He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe, but if they find you, they kill you and the child. I give you a chance." Before she could protest again. He pressed the carved charm into her hand, the same one he had placed by the fire the night before. "Keep it," he said, "for strength." Then he turned, disappearing into the shadows with his rifle in hand. Evelyn clutched the charm, her heart breaking with fear and gratitude. The baby whimpered softly, and she whispered his name, trying to calm him as she crawled into the narrow passageway. Behind her, the sound of shouting echoed faintly through the canyon. She didn't look back. The night swallowed the desert once again, and far in the darkness, gunfire cracked against the cliff sharp, distant and uncertain. The echoes of gunfire rolled across the canyon like thunder, bouncing between the red walls until they faded into silence. Evelyn froze in the narrow ravine, her breath shallow, clutching Samuel to her chest. The charm he'd given her was pressed so tightly in her palm, it left a mark. The sound of a distant shout reached her ears, then another shot. She couldn't tell if it came from him or them. The stream ahead glimmered faintly under the moonlight, winding deeper into the hills. She forced herself forward, crawling at first, then stumbling to her feet when the path widened. The baby stirred against her shoulder, crying softly. She whispered to him, begging for quiet, though she knew he couldn't understand. The cool air of the desert night bit into her skin, but her fear burned hotter. When she finally stopped, she was at the base of a low ridge surrounded by scrub and rock. She listened for pursuit, nothing but the sigh of wind. The silence made her uneasy. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It felt like the land itself was holding its breath. She sank to her knees beside the stream, trying to steady her heartbeat. Her reflection in the water looked like a stranger, dirt-streaked face, wild eyes, cracked lips. The woman who had once dreamed of a small farm and a quiet life was gone, but stared back with someone born of fear and survival. She stayed there for a while, unsure what to do next. She wanted to believe Koa would return, that he would appear out of the dark as he had before, calm and unbroken. But part of her knew the world didn't often give such miracles. She tried to think of her choices. Keep running? Hide? Stay by the stream? Her thoughts spun until she noticed movement among the rocks. Her breath caught. She crouched low, clutching Samuel close. Shadow shifted, then another. She tensed, ready to run, but then a familiar shape emerged. Tall figure limping slightly, rifle slung across his back. Koa. He was alive. When he reached her, his breathing was rough, and a dark stain marked his sleeve. She rose quickly, worry flooding her face. "You're hurt," she said, her voice shaking. He shook his head, brushing it off. "Not bad. It's just a cut." His eyes scanned the area. "You did good?" The danger wasn't gone. He crouched beside the stream, washing the blood from his arm, wincing as the cold water touched the wound. "They still hunt," he said quietly. "They don't stop easy." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Why? What do they want so badly?" He hesitated, glancing toward the horizon. "Something buried," he said. "Gold. Old army treasure. They take it from our land. Take it back." She looked at him in disbelief. "You're saying this is about gold?" Koa nodded once. "For them, yes. For me, it's more." He stared at the stream, his reflection trembling in the water. "That gold belongs to my people. The soldiers came years ago, built a fort in the mountains. When they left, they buried what they stole. Now white men dig it up again, thinking it's theirs." She could hear the bitterness in his voice, but there was no hatred, just weariness. He had lived too long watching greed destroy everything sacred to him. "And now they'll kill anyone in their way," she said quietly. "Yes," Koa replied, "and you saw me with them. So now they hunt you too." The truth hit her hard. Whatever had started this, she and her child were part of it now. The realization made her knees weak. She sank onto the ground, holding Samuel close as tears filled her eyes. "I never asked for this," she whispered. "I just wanted to get my son to safety." Koa watched her silently, then crouched beside her. His voice softened. "No one asks for the storm, Evelyn. It just comes, but you fight anyway." They rested until dawn painted the sky in pale pink and gold. Koa's wound had stopped bleeding, though he moved stiffly. When the first light touched the land, he stood and scanned the horizon. "We move again. My people's place." The path was rough, climbing between jagged cliffs. The sun grew hot, and Evelyn's strength faltered, but Koa never let her fall behind. When they reached a high plateau, she saw what he meant: a hidden valley surrounded by tall red stone, its floor scattered with the remains of an old Apache village. Crumbled walls, stone circles, and faded carvings marked the earth like memories. "This was your home?" she asked quietly. "My people lived here before the soldiers came," Koa said. "They called it Singing Rocks. The wind through the cliffs sounds like voices. The army burned it years ago." Evelyn looked around at the ruins. Despite the silence, she could almost feel the presence of those who once walked here. The place carried both sorrow and peace, like a wound that refused to close. They built a small shelter near the base of a cliff using what remained of the structures. For the first time in days, she felt a hint of safety, though it was fragile. As night fell, she sat by the fire, watching the flames dance across the stone walls. Koa sat nearby, sharpening his knife, his face thoughtful. "You said your people left you," he said suddenly. "The wagon train." She nodded, eyes on the fire. "We were heading west. My husband wanted land of our own. He believed in starting fresh, but when the attack came, they shot him. Died before I could help. The others panicked. They said staying meant we'd all die. So they took what they could and left me behind." Her voice broke at the end. Koa said nothing, but his jaw clenched. He understood loss more than words could tell. "I don't know," she said. "Part of me hates them. But another part just wants to know they made it." Koa nodded slowly. Sometimes hate and hope live in the same heart. A gust of wind swept through the canyon, carrying a sound that made Evelyn pause, a low hum that echoed softly between the cliffs. She looked up, startled. "Is that?" "The wind." Koa smiled faintly. "The singing. My ancestors." The sound was haunting but beautiful. For a moment, the fear that had chased her for days lifted. But the peace didn't last. Late that night, Koa returned from checking the traps, his expression dark. "Tracks," he said. "Our horses. They found us." Evelyn's heart dropped. "Here. Not yet," he said. "But close. It's maybe a day behind." They began preparing to move again, but exhaustion weighed heavy. Koa looked toward the mountains. "There's an old mine near here," he said. "That's where they dig. That's where they'll go. Maybe we can get ahead." "Why would we go there?" she asked. "Because what they want is buried under the same mountain that holds the spirits of my people," he said. "If they open it, they wake more than gold." His words carried a strange weight, a belief born from something older than fear. Evelyn didn't understand, but she saw the fire in his eyes. They set out before dawn again, moving through narrow trails and rocky passes. The land grew harsher, filled with deep shadows. Along the way, Koa told her pieces of his story of his father. A leader killed by soldiers of his mother who hid him among the cliffs of the years he spent fighting to protect what little remained of his tribe. I used to think revenge was enough, he said quietly as they walked, but it doesn't fill the emptiness. My people are gone. Only the land remembers. Evelyn listened, realizing how much of his life had been shaped by loss. Then why keep fighting? She asked. Because if no one remembers, then we truly die, he said simply. By midday, they reached the edge of the old mine. The entrance was carved into the side of a mountain, half hidden by overgrowth. Rusted tools lay scattered nearby, remnants of soldiers or settlers who'd tried to claim the gold. Koa crouched low, studying the ground. They've been here, he said. Recently, Evelyn looked around uneasy. What if they come back? They will, he said. But maybe I can finish what I started. Before she could ask what he meant, a faint sound carried through the air, a shout. Then another. Voices. They're here, Koa said sharply. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the rocks. They ducked behind a ridge as horses appeared at the mouth of the mine. 5 men dismounted, their clothes dusty and worn, rifles slung over their shoulders. Evelyn recognized the look of greed in their faces, the kind that would burn the world for a handful of gold. Sua's hand tightened around his weapon. But he didn't move, not yet. Do we run? She whispered. He shook his head. No, we wait. The men moved closer to the mine, arguing in low tones. Evelyn couldn't make out their words, but she caught fragments, gold stash, Apache tracks, find them before dark. Her pulse raced. She glanced at Koa, who watched them with the patience of a predator. But behind his calm, she sensed turmoil. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something sacred, something stolen long ago. The men entered the mine, disappearing into the dark. Koa turned to her, his expression grim. Stay here, he said. She grabbed his arm. No, don't go in there. He met her eyes. If I don't, they take everything, and they'll never stop. Then he slipped away into the shadows before she could stop him. Evelyn watched him vanish into the mountain, fear clawing at her chest. The cries of Samuel stirred softly against her shoulder, and she whispered to him, her voice trembling. Please come back, she murmured to the night. From deep within the mountain, a distant rumble echoed a sound that wasn't just human. She stared toward the dark entrance of the mine, her heart frozen between hope and dread, as the first flicker of orange light glowed faintly within the shadows. The glow from the mine entrance pulsed like a heartbeat in the dark. Evelyn crouched behind the rocks, clutching Samuel to her chest, her eyes fixed on that faint orange light deep inside the mountain. The rumble beneath her feet grew stronger, shaking the pebbles around her boots. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong to mere tools or footsteps. It was something older, something alive within the earth. She tried to stay calm, whispering to her child, but every instinct told her danger was closing in from all sides. Inside the mine, Koa moved silently through the narrow tunnels. The air was thick with the smell of dust and metal, the walls scarred from shovels and greed. The torchlight of the outlaws flickered ahead, casting jagged shadows against the rock. He could hear their laughter, harsh and mocking, echoing down the corridors. He moved closer, his footsteps light, his breath steady. The wound on his arm ached, but he pushed the pain aside. He had carried worse scars before. He knew this place. His father had brought him here once, long before the soldiers came. There had been no gold, then only sacred carvings, old markings that told the stories of his ancestors. The soldiers had destroyed most of them, tearing the mountain open in their hunger for riches. What they didn't know was that they had also broken something sacred beneath the stone, something never meant to be disturbed. Now, years later, Koa could feel that same uneasy presence again. The air inside the mine was wrung too heavy, too still. He pressed his hand against the rock, whispering in his native tongue, a quiet plea for forgiveness to the spirits buried here. Then he moved forward, his eyes hardening as he saw the men up ahead. There were 5 of them. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a long coat and a cruel grin, was barking orders. "Dig deeper," he shouted. "That Apache knows it's here somewhere. We find it tonight." Koa's grip tightened around his rifle. He recognized that voice. Years ago he had heard it in another raid, when the same men had ridden into his village and burned everything. He had escaped then, but not everyone had. Now fate had brought them back to the same ground. He took a breath, stepped from the shadows, and called out in a steady voice, "You dig in a grave, not a mine." The men froze. The leader turned, squinting into the dark. "You again," he said, his grin widening. "Didn't think you'd crawl back here after last time." Koa raised his rifle. "You should have left this place alone." The echo of his words bounced off the stone walls. One of the men reached for his gun, but Koa fired first. The shot cracked like thunder, the sound rolling through the tunnels. The flame of their torches flickered wildly as chaos broke out. Outside, Evelyn flinched at the sound of gunfire. Her heart leaped to her throat. She looked toward the mine entrance, torn between fear and instinct. She couldn't stay hidden while Koa faced them alone. But if she ran toward him, she'd be taking Samuel straight into danger. The baby whimpered, sensing her panic. She looked up at the sky, where the moon hung low, pale and cold. Then she heard another sound, the distant beat of hooves. Her breath caught. "Ah!" More riders. She ducked lower, pressing herself against the rocks. Across the valley, several figures appeared, silhouetted against the ridge. The outlaws had called for reinforcements. She watched as they dismounted and began moving toward the mine, rifles in hand. Her pulse raced. If they reached the mine, Koa would be trapped. She looked down at Samuel, who had finally fallen silent, then back at the horsemen. She knew she couldn't fight them, but she could warn him. Her fear melted into a sharp determination. She tore a strip from her dress, tied Samuel securely in the blanket, and placed him in a hollow between the rocks where he'd be hidden. "Stay quiet, my love," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "Mama will come back." Then she ran. Her boots scraped against the stone as she darted through the shadows, her breath coming in fast, shallow bursts. She reached the mouth of the mine and pressed herself against the wall, peering inside. The flicker of firelight revealed flashes of movement, men shouting, gunfire sparking against the rock, Koa moving like a shadow between the beams of light. He fired again, dropping one of the outlaws, then swung behind a support beam as bullets shattered stone beside him. He was outnumbered but not outmatched. He knew every twist of the tunnels, every hidden turn. "Come out, Apache," the leader shouted. "We'll give you the same mercy you gave our men." Koa's reply came like steel. "You had no mercy then?" The leader's laugh echoed through the mine. "You're a fool. You think the land will save you? It's already dead?" That word "dead" seemed to hang in the air. Then came another rumble, deeper than before. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The earth itself groaned. Evelyn stumbled as the ground beneath her shifted. The mine walls trembled. Somewhere deep inside, something cracked. Koa looked up sharply. He could feel it, the spirits of the mountains stirring, restless and angry. One of the outlaws cursed. The place is caving in, but the leader only grinned wider. "Then we dig faster. We're close." "I can feel it," Evelyn called out from the entrance. "Koa!" His head snapped toward her voice, shock flashing across his face. "Go back," he shouted. Before she could answer, a bullet whistled past her head, hitting the wall behind her. She dropped to the ground as sparks flew from the impact. One of the outlaws had spotted her. Koa's rage erupted. He stepped from behind cover and fired. The man fell instantly. But that brief distraction gave the others their chance. Two men rushed him from behind, tackling him to the ground. His rifle clattered across the stone. They wrestled in the dust, fists and boots striking. Koa managed to throw one off, but the other slammed his shoulder into the rock wall. The leader advanced slowly, revolver raised. "That's the end of your fight, warrior." Koa glared up at him, breathing hard, blood running down his arm. "You think this land belongs to you?" he said, voice low. "But it remembers what you've done," the leader sneered. "It remembers nothing but gold." He fired. But before the shot could hit, the ground split open with a violent tremor. The blast of sound was deafening. The walls shuddered, sending rocks tumbling. The leader stumbled, the bullet ricocheting off the stone. Evelyn screamed as the entrance collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris. The shockwave threw her backward, her head striking the ground. For a moment, everything went dark. When she came to, the air was thick with smoke. Her ears rang. She tried to move, coughing, her hands searching blindly for stability. The entrance to the mine was half blocked by fallen stone. "Koa," she called, her voice hoarse. "Koa, answer me." From within the haze she heard coughing, then his voice, faint but alive. "Evelyn, stay back." She pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the pain that burned through her side. She could see him through a gap in the rock, trapped but moving. The outlaws were nowhere to be seen, either crushed or buried deeper inside. But the leader was still alive, crawling toward Koa, revolver trembling in his hand. Koa tried to reach his weapon, but it was just out of reach. Evelyn saw it too. Without thinking, she grabbed a loose stone and hurled it through the opening. It struck the leader's arm, knocking the gun from his grip. He turned toward her with a snarl, eyes wild. "You should have stayed hidden," he spat. Before he could reach for his gun again, Koa lunged, tackling him hard into the ground. The two men fought in the narrow space, the sound of their struggle echoing through the broken mine. Dust swirled around them, filling the air like smoke from a dying fire. Evelyn tried to dig through the debris, her hands bleeding as she clawed at the rock. "Koa!" she cried. "You have to get out!" He didn't answer. The fight inside raged on. Then another tremor rippled through the ground, louder this time. The mine was dying. Koa pinned the leader down, their faces inches apart. "You took enough from this land," he said. "Now it takes you." The man struggled, spitting curses, but the earth roared again, drowning his voice. A section of the ceiling gave way. Evelyn screamed as the tunnel behind Koa began to collapse in a shower of dirt and stone. He turned his head toward her, their eyes locking through the chaos. For a moment, everything else faded, the rumble, the dust, the fear. Only that connection remained fragile and human. Then the light from the torches flickered once more and went out. The sound that followed was deafening. Outside, Evelyn stumbled backward as a wave of heat and air blasted from the mine entrance, sending dust and fire into the night sky. The mountain groaned, one last time before falling silent. She fell to her knees, coughing, her body shaking. The entrance was completely sealed now, nothing left but rock and smoke. The baby's cry drifted faintly through the darkness behind her, small and desperate, grounding her in the present. She turned toward the sound, tears streaming down her face. Her mind torn between the child who needed her and the man who had saved them both. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the low hum of the singing rocks. It was mournful now, rising and falling like the breath of the land itself. Feeling the faint vibration beneath her palm, the mountain still alive, still moving. Something deep inside told her the story wasn't over yet. The smoke lingered in the air long after the mountain had gone quiet. The night sky above was thick and pale with dust, swallowing the stars. Evelyn sat against a rock, her arms wrapped around Samuel, both trembling from exhaustion and grief. Her dress was torn, her hands raw and bloodied from clawing at the rubble. Every breath she took burned, every heartbeat carried one question: was he still alive beneath that mountain? The baby stirred in her arms, his small fingers brushing her chin, as if to remind her that life still held on, even when hope faltered. She pressed him close, closing her eyes to steady herself. Somewhere in that silence, she thought she heard something faint, a whisper of movement from within the debris. When morning came, the sunlight stretched across the desert, painting the rocks in shades of gold and red. Evelyn rose slowly, her body aching, and looked at the sealed entrance. The wind swept across the valley, carrying with it a thin, haunting hum from the singing rocks. She remembered the way Koa had spoken about them, the sound of the spirits watching, listening. She began to dig. Her fingers dug through dirt and broken stone until her nails split and her arms trembled. She had no tools, no help, just the raw will that refused to give in. Each handful she tossed aside felt like a prayer. She whispered his name under her breath again and again, as if the sound itself could reach him through the rock. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning against her skin. She was about to stop when she heard a muffled sound from deep within. Her heart leaped. Her heart leaped. She dropped to her knees, tears welling up as she clawed faster, calling his name. Then she saw Itanarm pushing through the rubble, bruised and covered in dust. She screamed with relief and dug with renewed strength. Slowly, painfully, Koa pulled himself out, gasping for air. His face was cut, his hair streaked with ash, but his eyes were alive. For a moment, neither spoke. They just stared at each other, both shaking, both disbelieving. Then Evelyn reached for him and he pulled her close. Samuel whimpered between them, and Koa looked down at the baby with a faint smile. "He's strong," he said quietly, "like his mother." Evelyn let out a broken laugh that turned into a sob. "I thought I lost you." Koa shook his head, still catching his breath. "The mountain spared me. Maybe it's not done with us yet." They sat there together until the sun began to sink again behind the hills. The land was scarred, the mine destroyed, but the desert felt calmer now, as if something had finally been set right. When the night came, Koa built a small fire near the ridge. The flames flickered against their tired faces. He had wrapped his wound again with a strip of his own shirt. Evelyn sat beside him, holding Samuel as he slept, the child's face soft and peaceful in the firelight. She finally asked the question that had been haunting her since the beginning. "Why did you come back for us that night?" He stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "Because I saw what they did before, to my people, to my land. When I found you out there with your child, I saw the same kind of cruelty chasing you. I couldn't turn away again." Evelyn listened quietly. "Saved us." He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the light of the fire. "No, the land saved us, just carried you through it." The words hung in the air, soft but full of weight. She thought of how he had walked into danger without hesitation, how he had risked everything to protect her and Samuel. There was strength in him that went deeper than any man she'd known, a kind of peace born from pain and purpose. As the night deepened, the singing rocks began their low, haunting hum again. Evelyn turned her head toward the sound. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Koa nodded. "They're at peace now. The mountain has its silence again." She looked at him, realizing that his eyes were fixed on the horizon, not on what was behind them. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. He poked at the fire, sending sparks into the cool air. "There's land farther north," he said. "Green land, safe land. Maybe I'll go there when the season changes." He paused, his voice quieter. "You could come too." Evelyn looked down at Samuel, then back at him. "Would you want us to?" He met her gaze with a small nod. A child should grow where the wind carries peace, not fear. Something inside her loosened then, the weight she had carried since that night in the desert finally beginning to lift. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she wanted to see it. The days that followed were quiet. They stayed near the valley, resting and gathering what little food they could. Koa built a small shelter from fallen wood and stone, and Evelyn cleaned the wound on his arm each morning. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. There was an understanding between them, spoken but strong. One evening, while Samuel slept, Evelyn asked, "Do you ever miss it? Your village?" Koa looked out at the desert. "Every day, but I carry it here." He touched his chest. "The land remembers even when people forget." His words stayed with her long after the fire went out. By the end of the week, Koa had regained his strength. They packed what little they had and began walking north, following the path of the river that cut through the canyon. The water was shallow, cool, and silver in the morning light. Samuel laughed when Koa splashed his hands in it, his first sound of pure joy since the night of the storm. They traveled for days, sometimes silent, sometimes talking about things that didn't need answers, the shapes of clouds, the way the air smelled after rain, the calls of distant birds. It was as if the land itself was teaching them how to live again. When they finally reached the open plains, Evelyn stopped and looked back. The mountain was far behind them now, its peak barely visible through the haze. For a moment she thought she saw a figure standing at the ridge, watching them, a shadow of someone proud, tall, and still. Maybe it was her imagination, or maybe the spirits of the singing rocks were still keeping watch. She turned to Koa. "Do you think the land forgave us?" Smiled faintly. "The land doesn't hold grudges. It only waits for us to learn." They walked on until the plains opened into rolling hills. There they built a small cabin near a patch of cottonwoods. The air was sweet with the smell of wildflowers and rain. Life became simple, quiet mornings, soft laughter, and the sound of wind through the trees. Sometimes Evelyn would wake before dawn and see Koa outside, standing barefoot in the grass, his eyes turned toward the horizon. He never spoke during those moments, but she knew he was listening to the land, to the past, to something greater than either of them. As months passed, Samuel grew stronger, his first steps taken beneath the same wide sky that had once seemed so cruel. Evelyn often thought of the mine, of the men who had dug too deep and lost everything, and she understood now what Koa had meant. The land didn't belong to anyone, it simply endured, patient and eternal. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in gold, Koa handed her a small carved stone. "From the singing rocks," he said, "to remind you that the mountain still sings." She turned the stone in her hand, feeling its smooth edges. "And you?" she asked. "What will you remember?" He looked at her, and then at the child playing nearby. That even after fire and ruin, there can be peace again. The wind picked up then, soft and warm, rustling through the grass. It carried the faintest hum-like, the echo of the singing rocks, distant but alive. Evelyn smiled, holding the stone close to her heart. As the sky turned to twilight, she felt something she hadn't in a long time belonging. The desert had taken much from her, but it had also given her something deeper. Life would go on, not in the shadow of loss, but in the light of what had survived. The land would remember their story, just as it remembered every struggle, every voice, every breath that had ever touched it. And somewhere, beneath the calm of the hills and the hum of the earth, the mountain slept again, its secret safe, its song eternal.